You're the father of my baby. Laura's voice didn't shake. That's what scared him the most. Daniel Hayes had heard a lot of strange things in his life, but nothing, absolutely nothing like that. They were standing in a small corner cafe in downtown Seattle, the kind with exposed brick walls and the smell of burnt espresso hanging in the air. It was a gray afternoon, the kind that already made people uneasy. Laura sat across from him, her fingers wrapped tightly around a half-finished cup of coffee. She looked right at him, eyes bright, lips trembling with what looked like conviction. Daniel blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. What did you just say? You heard me. Her voice was soft but deliberate. I'm pregnant, and it's yours. For a few seconds, Daniel's brain refused to process the words. Then came the laugh, not one of amusement, but disbelief. Laura, that's impossible. We've never— I'm not crazy, Daniel, she interrupted, her tone rising slightly. You were at Ryan's party last spring. You drank. You don't remember, do you? He exhaled sharply, leaning back in his chair. No, because nothing happened. But she didn't seem to hear him. Or maybe she didn't want to. She just kept talking, her words tumbling out faster and faster, like a rehearsed speech she'd finally decided to deliver. You need to be responsible. You don't get to just walk away from this. Daniel stared at her for a long moment. There was something off, a glimmer in her eyes that wasn't anger or sadness, but something more erratic. He'd known Laura for years, not well, but enough to know she'd always struggled with stability. Ryan, her brother and Daniel's best friend since high school, had once mentioned she'd been through some stuff, but Daniel never pried. It wasn't his place. Still, none of that explained this. Laura, he said finally, keeping his voice calm. I don't know what's going on, but you need help, not me. Her face hardened instantly. Wow, you're really going to deny your own child? You're unbelievable. He stood up, tossing a few dollars onto the table for the untouched coffee. I'm not denying anything, because there's nothing to deny. As he turned to leave, her voice followed him out the door. You'll regret this, Daniel. Everyone will know what kind of man you really are. 2 days later, they did. The first rumor came through a mutual friend, someone Daniel barely knew. Hey man, Laura's saying she's pregnant, that it's yours. Is that true? He froze in the hallway of his apartment building, keys still in hand. No, he said, too quickly. It's insane. But by the time he hung up, he knew it didn't matter what he said. In small circles, truth moved slower than lies. Within a week, whispers turned into phone calls. Old college friends texted him awkwardly, asking if he was doing okay. Even at work, he caught colleagues glancing when they thought he wasn't looking. And then Ryan called. Dan, I've been trying to reach you. His voice cracked through the line. Laura's freaking out. Man, she says you're ghosting her. Daniel's jaw clenched. Because she's lying, Ryan. You know me. I know. But she's saying some really detailed stuff. She says, you two, hooked up after my birthday party. Daniel laughed bitterly. Your party? Ryan, I left that night early. You saw me leave. There was silence on the other end. Then Ryan sighed. I don't know what to think, man. She's my sister. And there it was, the shift. That subtle, invisible fracture between trust and doubt. By the end of the month, Daniel's parents found out. His father was the first to call. The old man's voice carried the heavy tone of disappointment, not anger. Just that quiet authority that always made Daniel feel 12 again. Son, his father said slowly, we heard something troubling. About a girl named Laura. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Dad, it's a lie. Please, don't. Your mother's heartbroken, he interrupted. We raised you better than this. Then his mother's voice cut in from the background, brittle with tears. Daniel, how could you do this? She's just a girl, and you're abandoning her. I didn't do anything, he said, his voice cracking. Mom, please. I wasn't even in Seattle when she got pregnant. I can prove it. Stop lying, she cried. We can't believe what you've become. The conversation spiraled, accusation after accusation. No matter how he explained, no matter how many facts he offered, they only grew colder. It wasn't logic they wanted. It was someone to blame. That night, Daniel drove to his parents' house, a quiet neighborhood he hadn't visited in months. He laid out everything, the timeline, flight receipts from a business trip to San Francisco, screenshots of messages proving he hadn't spoken to Laura in months. His father sat across from him, arms crossed. His mother refused to look at him. When he finished, there was silence. For a brief second, Daniel thought maybe, just maybe, they believed him. Then his father exhaled through his nose, a low sound of disapproval. Son, he said, even if you're not sure, even if you don't remember, the right thing to do is to take responsibility. Daniel's stomach dropped. You're not listening. We are, his mother said sharply. We're listening to a scared young woman carrying your child while you sit here making excuses. Something inside him cracked. He wanted to scream, to shake them, to demand they see him, but all he could do was stare. The people who had taught him right from wrong were now blind to the truth. Do you even hear yourselves? He said quietly. You're choosing a stranger's lie over your own son. His father's expression didn't change. Then prove us wrong, step up. Be a man. The words hit harder than any slap could. That night, Daniel packed a bag. He moved mechanically, a few shirts, his laptop, toiletries. His mother's voice echoed faintly from downstairs, still pleading, still angry, still unbelieving. He didn't answer. He just walked to the door, suitcase in hand. At the threshold, he paused. The house smelled like cinnamon and laundry detergent, the scent of safety he had always associated with home. But now, it felt foreign, suffocating. He turned once, seeing his father's rigid silhouette in the hallway light. His mother stood behind him, her face pale and distant. If the truth isn't enough for you to believe me, Daniel said, his voice calm, almost eerily so, then nothing ever will. He stepped out into the night. The door closed softly behind him. Rain had begun to fall slow, heavy drops tapping against his jacket, each one a quiet reminder of everything that had just broken. He got into his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. For a long while, he didn't start the engine. He just sat there, breathing, staring into the dark street ahead. His phone buzzed. Another message from Ryan. Man, Laura's posting about you online. People are starting to talk. I don't know what to do. Daniel turned the phone face down. The screen dimmed, leaving only his reflection in the glass tired eyes, tight jaw. A man standing on the edge of a storm he never created. He whispered to no one in particular. I didn't do anything, but, in a world that thrives on noise, silence rarely saves you. As he drove away from the only home he'd ever known, a thought followed him, quiet but relentless. If the truth could be so easily buried beneath lies, then what else could be destroyed by a single sentence? He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning, because the truth, when it finally came, wouldn't bring peace. It would blow everything apart. But when the truth finally surfaced, Daniel would later say, it didn't set anyone free. It just made everything explode. When Daniel left that night, he thought silence would save him. He thought that if he stayed quiet, if he let time do the talking, the truth would eventually rise on its own. But 6 months later, he learned that silence, in the wrong hands, could be turned into a weapon. Laura Thompson gave birth to a baby boy on a rainy Tuesday morning. The news reached Daniel through Ryan. His friend's voice over the phone sounded tired, drained. She had the baby, Ryan said. She's saying it's definitely yours. Daniel almost laughed, not out of amusement, but out of disbelief that this nightmare still had life left in it. Then let's prove it, he said. I'm filing for a paternity test. For the first time in months, he felt in control. He hired an attorney, arranged everything through the court, and waited. Laura resisted at first, refusing to cooperate until the judge ordered her to comply. Weeks later, the results arrived in a crisp white envelope that felt heavier than it should. Daniel sat at his kitchen table, hands trembling slightly as he tore it open. His eyes scanned the page, and then 0.00% probability of paternity. He exhaled, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. 6 months of humiliation, whispers, and sleepless nights, all disproved in one piece of paper. Relief washed over him, but it wasn't warm. It was cold, sharp, like the air after a storm that destroyed everything in its path. He sent copies of the report to his parents, attaching a short note. This is a truth you refuse to believe. For a while there was silence. Then his mother called Daniel honey. Her voice cracked through the phone, soft and cautious, as if she were the one who'd been hurt. We saw the results. Your father and I, we're so sorry. You must have felt terrible. He closed his eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Yeah, I did. We didn't know what to believe, she said quickly. You know how rumors spread. Maybe we could meet for dinner, talk about it as a family. Daniel didn't answer. After a pause, his father's voice came on the line. Steady, controlled. Son, we know we made mistakes. Maybe we can help you get back on your feet. I can wire you some money, or maybe buy you a new car. Start fresh. That was it. That was their version of an apology, transactional, hollow, wrapped in guilt and control. Daniel's voice was calm, almost too calm. You think you can buy your way out of this? Don't talk like that, his father warned. No, Daniel said. You don't get to talk to me about responsibility ever again. He hung up. The paper that should have cleared his name didn't fix anything. It just exposed the cracks that had been there all along. But Laura wasn't done. When word got out that the DNA results had cleared Daniel, she snapped. She told anyone who'd listen that the test was fake, that Daniel had paid someone to tamper with the results. In a small town, truth doesn't matter. People choose the story that entertains them most. And Laura's version, the one where Daniel was a manipulative coward, spread faster than wildfire. At the grocery store, he caught strangers staring at him. At work, conversations stopped when he entered the room. A colleague even asked, half joking, "So, how much does it cost to fake a paternity test these days?" Daniel smiled politely, but that night, he sat alone in his apartment, staring at the ceiling until dawn. He had proof, but no peace. Even Ryan began to distance himself. "Man," he said one afternoon, "this whole thing's out of control. Laura's a mess, my parents are mad, and everyone's asking questions. I can't keep defending you. You shouldn't have to defend me." Daniel replied quietly, "The truth should do that." "Yeah, well, sometimes the truth doesn't sell." Weeks passed. Then the phone started ringing again. His mother left long voicemails, crying, pleading, reminiscing about childhood memories as if nostalgia could erase betrayal. "Please come home. Danny, your father misses you. Let's have dinner, talk things through. We can pretend this whole mess never happened." But that was exactly the problem. They didn't want to acknowledge what they'd done. They wanted to bury it, sweep it under the rug, and move on as if forgiveness could be traded for convenience. Then came the email from his father's son. "Your mother's been worried sick. I've been thinking maybe it's time we start fresh. You always liked that black Mustang, right? Consider it a gift, no strings attached." Daniel stared at the message for a long time, his jaw tightening. It wasn't generosity. It was control dressed as kindness, their last attempt to pull him back into the web. He didn't respond. One night he found himself driving aimlessly through the city. The streets were quiet, the air heavy with drizzle. He parked by the waterfront, the lights of Seattle reflecting on the dark water, and finally allowed himself to feel everything he'd been avoiding, the exhaustion, the bitterness, the grief. He thought about his parents, about Laura, about how quickly people he loved had chosen a lie over him. And in that quiet moment, something inside him hardened. "They're not sorry," he whispered to the reflection in the glass. "They're just scared they don't control me anymore." That realization hit deeper than anger ever could. It was clarity, cold, absolute. The next morning, Daniel drafted a single email. Subject, boundaries. Mom, Dad, I appreciate the offers, but what I need isn't money or gifts, it's respect. You didn't lose a son. You threw him away because the truth was inconvenient. When you learn to value honesty over appearances, you'll know how to reach me. Until then, this will be my last message. Daniel. He sent it, blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts, and moved to a new apartment across the city. He changed jobs, changed his number, changed everything that could tether him to the past. For the first time in nearly a year, there was quiet, but quiet has its own kind of danger because when people like his parents lose control, they don't accept silence, they see it as defiance. A month later, Daniel received a voicemail from Ryan. His tone was uneasy. "Man, I don't know what's going on, but your mum called me. She said you've cut them off, and that they're worried about you. They're telling everyone you're unstable or something." Daniel closed his eyes, the weight of inevitability pressing on him. Of course, if they couldn't own their guilt, they'd rewrite the story again, make him the villain this time. He deleted the message without replying. That night, he stood by his window, watching rain trail down the glass. The city lights flickered below, a reminder that life kept moving. Even when yours had been hijacked by someone else's lies. He had tried everything, logic, evidence, distance. Nothing worked. People didn't want truth. They wanted comfort, and the irony was, the one thing he'd done to protect his peace, silence, was now being used to destroy it again. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, took a slow sip, and let the burn settle. The reflection staring back at him looked older than a year ago, harder, quieter, but still standing. "If they wanted a villain," he muttered under his breath, "maybe it's time I stopped playing the hero." He didn't mean revenge. He meant boundaries. Real ones. The kind that don't bend for guilt or blood. Daniel wasn't naive anymore. He knew how fragile reputations were, how fast love could turn into leverage. And he knew, more than anything, that silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. He turned off his phone, shut off the lights, and stood in the dark for a long while. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and deliberate, like a warning of what was still to come. He didn't know it yet, but the real war hadn't even started. Because some people don't stop when they lose control, they just find new ways to take it back. "I thought walking away was the end." Daniel would later say, but I was wrong. My silence didn't calm the storm, it only made them louder. When Daniel cut them off, he thought it was over. He thought silence would be enough, that distance could rebuild what was left of his sanity. But silence, to people who crave control, is never peace. It's defiance. And defiance demands punishment. It started small, a few strange messages from old friends, colleagues he hadn't spoken to in months. Hey man, just checking in. Your mom called. She said you've been going through something. Another text. A day later, your dad mentioned you've been depressed lately. Are you okay? Daniel frowned at the screen. Depressed. That word wasn't even close to what he felt. He wasn't broken. He was angry. But now, that didn't matter. A new story was forming, one where he wasn't the victim of lies, but the unstable son who'd lost his way. Within weeks, his parents had called nearly everyone they knew, neighbors, old family, friends, even his high school teacher spinning the same tale. We're worried about Daniel. He's not well. He won't talk to us. He's shutting everyone out. It was manipulative, perfectly crafted to make them seem like caring parents, while painting him as fragile and unstable. And in a world where sympathy always sides with the loudest voice, Daniel's silence made their version sound believable. The breaking point came one Monday morning. Daniel was called into his manager's office. Hey, she said, forcing a polite smile. I just wanted to check in. Your dad reached out to HR last week. He froze. My dad? Yeah, he said you've been struggling mentally, and he was worried about your performance. He asked if the company could keep an eye on you. Daniel's stomach turned. His father had crossed a line, contacting his workplace, planting seeds of doubt where he built his life from scratch. He stared at his boss, trying to keep his composure. I appreciate your concern, he said finally, but whatever my parents said isn't true. They're not in my life anymore. She hesitated. Is everything okay at home? He gave a small, humorless laugh. It was until they decided to ruin it. That night, Daniel sat in the dark, his laptop open, legal websites glowing on the screen. For months, he'd played defense, absorbing every hit, hoping reason would eventually win. But now, the lies were spreading into every corner of his life. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was professional. It was survival. He picked up his phone, found a number, and called. Law Office of Carter and Miles. A voice answered. I need a restraining order, Daniel said, against my parents, and someone named Laura Thompson. 2 weeks later, he sat across from his attorney in a quiet office lined with case files. We'll start with a no-contact order, the lawyer said, scanning the papers Daniel had brought. You've got evidence, texts, emails, witnesses. It's enough. Daniel nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of the folder. I don't want to destroy them, he said softly. I just want them to stop. The attorney gave him a steady look. Sometimes, the only way to stop people like that is to make them face consequences. When the court order was finally granted, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Control. It wasn't victory. It wasn't joy. It was peace. Thin, fragile peace. He didn't send them a message. He didn't post about it online or gloat to friends. He didn't even tell Ryan. He simply went silent. The kind of silence that unnerves manipulators because it denies them an audience. Instead, he worked methodically. Every false rumor, every text, every voice message from his mother crying into the phone, he documented it all. The court didn't need emotion. It needed evidence. And Daniel had plenty when his parents' lawyer tried to argue that the family only wanted to help. Daniel's attorney handed over a printed email, his father writing to HR, labeling his own son as a mental risk. When Laura's defense tried to dismiss her lies as emotional distress, Daniel's lawyer produced screenshots of her messages, boasting to friends about making him pay. He didn't raise his voice once. He didn't need to. The law spoke for him. By the end of that month, the verdicts came in. Laura received an official warning and a fine for defamation. His parents were issued a full restraining order, no calls, no visits, no contact of any kind. For the first time in nearly a year, Daniel's phone was quiet. He could go to work without fear of whispers, walk into stores without stares. He could breathe again. But peace doesn't always come without cost. One morning, as he walked toward his car, something caught his eye. Deep scratches carved across the metallic surface of the driver's door. The word was jagged, deliberate, ugly. Liar. He stood there, motionless, the sound of traffic humming faintly in the background. A few passers-by slowed down, watching him. One of them murmured, "That's harsh." Daniel didn't move for a while. Then he pulled out his phone, took a picture, and sent it straight to his attorney. No words, just the photo. The next day the police came by to take a statement. The officer was sympathetic but practical. Any idea who could have done this? Daniel gave a bitter half-smile. I have a few guesses. The officer nodded. We'll file it, but without footage or witnesses, it'll be hard to prove. He understood, and strangely, he didn't even feel angry, just tired. Because by now, he finally understood the truth. You can't fix people who love power more than they love truth. That night, he sat by his window, the city lights flickering like distant stars. He thought about everything that had happened, the lies, the shame, the exhaustion of defending himself against the people who were supposed to protect him. He realized something important. Winning in court didn't mean healing. Justice doesn't erase betrayal. It just exposes it. Still, he felt something like strength growing in the quiet. Not the loud kind that comes with revenge, but the silent kind, the kind that comes from surviving. He poured himself a glass of water, stared at his reflection in the window, and said quietly to himself, they wanted me to break, but all they did was teach me how to stand alone. Weeks passed. The restraining orders held. The rumors started to fade. People moved on. Or at least, that's what Daniel thought. Then, one afternoon, he came home to find an envelope on his doorstep. It was thick, stamped with the emblem of the state court. He tore it open, scanning the first page, and felt his chest tighten. Notice of civil action. Plaintiffs, Richard and Evelyn Hayes. Defendant, Daniel Hayes. Cause, emotional distress and familial defamation. For a long moment, he just stood there, the paper shaking slightly in his hands. Then he let out a quiet, humorless laugh. They're suing me, he whispered. My own parents are suing me. He dropped into the nearest chair, the absurdity sinking in. They'd tried to destroy him with lies, and now, when silence didn't bend him, they were using the law, his own weapon, against him. He stared at the page again, reading the final line. The plaintiffs claim the defendant's behavior has caused severe emotional suffering. Daniel leaned back, closing his eyes. Emotional suffering, he repeated softly, the words tasting bitter. They burned my life down, and now they're the ones in pain. Outside, thunder rumbled low, a storm building over the skyline. He folded the papers neatly, placed them on the table, and whispered, almost to himself, fine, if this is how they want to play. I'll see them in court. I thought silence was my protection, Daniel would later say, but to them, silence was provocation. And that's when I realized this wasn't a family feud anymore. It was war. When Daniel opened the lawsuit notice, he thought it was a cruel joke, some kind of twisted attempt to scare him. But it wasn't. It was real, signed, stamped, and scheduled for court. His parents, the people who gave him life, were now suing him for emotional distress. He didn't cry. He didn't yell. He just sat there, reading each line until the words stopped feeling like words and started feeling like noise. After everything they had done, the lies, the manipulation, the humiliation, now they were the ones claiming he had hurt them. And that was when Daniel made a promise to himself. This time he wouldn't defend himself with emotion. He would fight with facts quietly, cleanly, and completely. The court date arrived on a cold morning in late November. Daniel sat at the defendant's table, his posture calm, his face unreadable. Across the room, his parents sat together, Richard and Evelyn Hayes, both dressed in black, their expressions perfectly curated for pity. Evelyn dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Richard kept his hand on her shoulder, the image of a grieving father. When the judge entered, the air in the room seemed to freeze. The case was short on evidence but heavy on drama. His parents' lawyer began first, his voice dripping with practiced empathy. Your Honor, my clients have endured immense emotional suffering. Their son's decision to publicly accuse them, to isolate himself, and to seek restraining orders, all of these actions have deeply wounded them. They only want reconciliation. Evelyn sniffled audibly. Richard nodded solemnly, adding under his breath, he's not the same boy we raised. Daniel watched silently, fingers clasped together. He didn't interrupt. He didn't roll his eyes. He just listened, letting every accusation pile up neatly, waiting for the moment it would all collapse under its own weight. When it was his attorney's turn, she rose slowly, calm but sharp. Her voice carried the kind of precision that slices without needing volume. Your Honor, she began, what my client has endured is not emotional conflict, it's targeted harassment. She placed a thick folder on the desk. Inside this file are months of documented behavior, false claims, manipulation, defamation, and violations of privacy. The judge adjusted his glasses. Proceed. She opened the first exhibit, the paternity test results. This is the DNA report from 6 months ago, confirming that Daniel Hayes is not the father of the child in question. Despite this, the plaintiffs continued to publicly accuse him. Next came the printed emails. Exhibit B, Messages from Mr. and Mrs. Hayes to my client's employer, describing him as mentally unstable and a potential risk. These actions directly endangered his career. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Evelyn's hand dropped from her face. Richard shifted uncomfortably. The attorney didn't stop. Exhibit C, the restraining order granted by this very court, following months of harassment. And Exhibit D, recorded voicemails and text messages, including one where Mrs. Hayes begs her son to come home and fix what he broke, implying guilt for something he did not do. The judge raised a hand. That will be enough. But the attorney wasn't finished. One last note, Your Honor. My client has not spoken publicly about this case, has not retaliated online or in person. His so-called harmful behavior was silence, the only form of protection left to him. Silence fell heavy across the room. The judge leaned back in his chair, looking over the documents once more. His tone, when he finally spoke, was calm but absolute. The court finds no merit in the plaintiff's claims. This case is dismissed. Furthermore, the plaintiffs are ordered to cover the defendant's legal fees. Evelyn's mouth fell open. Richard muttered something under his breath, but the sound was drowned out by the judge's gavel striking once, firm and final. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and turned toward his parents. For a moment, his eyes met his mother's, her expression a storm of anger and shame. He wanted to feel something, pity maybe, but all he felt was calm. Family isn't blood, he said quietly. Family is the people who don't stab you when you fall. Then he walked out, leaving the courtroom and everything that had once chained him behind. Months passed, the snow melted, spring came, and Daniel began building something new, something normal. He found a new job in another city, joined a small hiking group, even adopted a stray dog from a shelter. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, but it was peace. He stopped checking social media, stopped responding to messages from mutual acquaintances. For the first time, his silence wasn't a shield, it was freedom, but freedom has a way of making some people furious. One evening, he received a message from an aunt, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Daniel, your parents are having a family reunion next weekend. They said you'll be there to apologize. Is that true? He almost laughed out loud. Of course. It was never about reconciliation. It was about control, about rewriting the story one more time. He didn't reply. He didn't go. The day of the reunion came and went without him. But the next week, the fallout began. Relatives called his parents out publicly. Some demanded answers. Others stopped speaking to them entirely. The truth, the years of manipulation, the lies, the cruelty finally began to leak out. Not because Daniel said anything, but because their own actions betrayed them. And as their image of the perfect family crumbled, Daniel realized something profound. Justice doesn't always happen in court. Sometimes, it happens quietly, when the lies finally run out of places to hide. A few months later, Daniel sat at a small cafe by the waterfront, watching the sun sink into the bay. His dog slept at his feet, the gentle hum of evening traffic blending with the sound of waves. He'd thought about forgiveness a lot, what it meant, whether he owed it to anyone. And he realized, maybe forgiveness wasn't what people thought it was. Forgiveness didn't mean letting people back in. It didn't mean pretending nothing happened. Sometimes, forgiveness was simply deciding to stop bleeding for people who cut you on purpose. He stirred his coffee, the corners of his mouth curving into the faintest smile. Forgiveness isn't opening the door, he whispered. Sometimes, it's locking it, and throwing away the key. The peace that followed wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, steady, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to prove your worth to people who never wanted to see it. He paid his bill, stood up, and stepped outside. The air was cool, the sky streaked with the last traces of orange dot. As he walked down the street, he thought about everything, the years of chaos, the endless need to defend himself, the painful truth that sometimes love isn't enough to make people kind. He wasn't angry anymore, just grateful that he'd learned what real family meant. Real family wasn't the ones who shared your DNA, it was the ones who showed up when your world was burning and helped you rebuild it, piece by piece. That night, Daniel wrote one final entry in his journal. The same one he'd started the week Laura accused him. If the people who gave you life can also try to destroy it because they can't control your truth, then maybe blood isn't what makes a family after all. He closed the book, set it on the shelf, and turned off the light. Outside, the city was quiet, not because it had forgiven, but because it had finally forgotten. And Daniel Hayes, the man once buried under lies, finally disappeared into peace.